We all perceive things differently. That is what chapter 4 is about. It's about social perception and how the mind can influence what we see. For example, what do you see here? It might be a duck, depending on your perspective. It might be a rabbit, depends on how you're looking at it. This was created back in 1899 by an American psychologist. And the point he wanted to make was that what one sees isn't just perception, it's also a mental activity. So if you look at it, you can see a duck, and if you really think about it, you might be able to switch over to the rabbit and then switch back and forth. Again, it's a mental activity. It's not just input in. That's the first example for social perception. Just so you're aware, the next example we're going to talk about, it does reference Nazi symbolism. We are not debating Nazism itself, but we're using the controversy to explore how people perceive ambiguous stimuli, ambiguous events. What we're trying to do is look at this through the lens of social psychology. So we are going to talk a little bit about Nazi symbolism starting now. So this is the image, Elon Musk, inauguration event. He makes this gesture. And so when you see that image, what do you think? What was the purpose of that? Why did he make that gesture? And I was like, a student brought this example to me last year, and I was like, this seems like a really good example. It demonstrates several key concepts in social psychology, and so we will go through those. What it really comes down to is that two people can see the same thing with their eyes, but not see the same thing at all, because it's going to be colored by our own experiences, our own culture, our own politics, the party that you're in. Again, going back to the rabbit and the duck, it is a mental activity. Okay, your perceptual set. The definition for this, the psychological tendency to perceive one aspect of sensory information, what's coming in, and ignore all the other information. It's going to be influenced by our expectations, our emotions, our cultural background, and our past experiences. Basically, all those things come together to inform you of what you are seeing. For some, they saw a Nazi or a fascist Roman salute. And others, including the Anti-Defamation League, that's not what they saw. They called it an awkward gesture in the moment of enthusiasm. And so this shows how prior expectations, the knowledge, the context influences what people see in an ambiguous stimuli. Again, it's ambiguous. That's the key word, ambiguous. If it was an image of a Nazi, an actual Nazi making the salute, had a swastika armband, that's not ambiguous. We know exactly what's going on there. The Musk situation, people do perceive that one in different ways. The ADL, just as for reference, it's an NGO. It combats anti-Semitism. Also of note, Musk and the ADL are not allies. The ADL has accused Twitter/X of being anti-Semitic, and Musk has threatened to sue them because of that. So they are not friends. For them to say that this is not a Nazi salute, it's at least an interesting piece of this puzzle. So perceptual set, partisan perception. This is a big one for it. We are very politicized as a country. You have to toe the party line. We will get into group processes and conformity later on in the semester. But essentially, if your party says it's the Nazi salute, then so do you. If your party says it's a gesture from the heart, then so do you. And we can see that here. 73% of Harris voters said it was a Nazi or Roman salute. 79% of Trump voters said it was a gesture from the heart. So what's going on there is our political identity is shaping how we see that event. The stats, they come from, this is from my YouGov poll. These numbers are actually interesting to me. I hadn't seen them until very recently. Before I saw this, I had assumed that the majority of Americans thought that it was a Nazi salute, which reveals a bias that I wasn't even aware that I had. The reason I think I had that bias is because of the media. I do remember seeing a lot of headlines that said, at that time, this is a Nazi salute. So it influenced my perception. Okay, so you can see 42% said it was a gesture from the heart, 37% a Nazi salute. If you also, though, it's like Nazi salute, Roman salute, if you combine those together, you're going to get 42% as well. But as far as percentage-wise goes, the largest one is a gesture from the heart. These are Americans in this poll. We are going to talk about attributions and motivational differences, but before we get to that, we should probably talk about cultural differences because this is also a really big one as well. Chapter 4 says that our perception can be filtered through a cultural meaning system. Example, so if you flip somebody off in this country, the middle finger, we all know what that means here. That being said, it's not inherently cross-cultural. Several Asian countries, they don't have that connection with the middle finger meaning that. They do know what it means because of Western media, but the culture, they don't use it as a symbol. Here, thumbs up, that means great. Some Middle Eastern countries, it's the equivalent of the middle finger here. So there are cultural differences with gestures. So in the US, the gesture that Musk made, it can be ambiguous. Not every person that raises their arm in that manner is making a Nazi salute. That's in the United States. In Germany, however, they have a completely different perception of that gesture. Even though it can be considered ambiguous here, over there, obviously, it's going to bring to mind Nazi Germany. It brings up a shared cultural trauma, which is going to be emotional, and it's going to influence what they see. So political parties influence what you see. The culture you're in influences what you see. With attribution theory, attributions, it's basically like, why did he do this? And people make very different causal attributions for that. Why did you make the gesture? He did it because he's a Nazi. That's one. He did it because he's just kind of strange and awkward sometimes. That's one. He did it because he was trolling us and he wanted to cause a controversy. That's another interpretation of that. Those are all attributions. It's like, why did he do it? This is why. Related to that, you could maybe talk a little bit about the fundamental attribution error, where we're more likely to blame the person than the situation. We overestimate the personal factors and ignore the situational factors. The personal attribution for this is he did it, from that perspective, he did it because he supports the Nazis. The situational factors, though, could be things like the context. He was really excited during that speech. Maybe it caused him to make an awkward gesture, perhaps. We also have motivational biases. One of them is called wishful seeing, where you're going to see what you want to see. Again, though, these are biases that you may not be aware of. If you already don't like Musk, though, when you see him, you're going to have a negative idea in your mind, and you're going to assume negative things about him. It's called a negative halo effect. And so when you see that image, you may automatically, you don't think it through, just automatically associate that gesture with the negative. And in this case, that's going to be with Nazism. But if you don't see him as negative, there's a chance that you will not perceive that gesture as negatively. Like if you think he's a great guy, you have a motivation to keep that idea consistent about him. And so because you think he's a great guy, it's like a Nazi salute, that's what a bad guy does. You think to yourself, it's like, okay, if I think he's a good guy, then it's not a Nazi salute, because that would be what the bad guy does. Essentially, you're going to see, with wishful seeing, you're going to see what's consistent with your worldview that you already have. And very similar to that, most people know about this nowadays, confirmation bias. Very similar. You're going to seek out information that supports the views that you already have. And this is a really hard one. We all have it to some degree, have confirmation bias, and you really have to sit down and think outside of yourself to see it, like metacognition. Why am I thinking the things that I'm thinking? But it's hard. And also to seek out information that doesn't support your beliefs. For a lot of people, that's really hard, especially when you're making these automatic, quick decisions. Because to slow it down, to actually go look for more information, we're cognitive misers. We don't want to slow down. We just want to make these quick automatic decisions and move on. Related to that, perseverance of beliefs. Once you believe something, it can be really hard to shake that idea. It takes admitting that you are wrong. You have to go look for new information, and then it takes admitting that you are wrong. And people don't like to do that. It causes issues with the ego. And also you have to think about nuance. Again, we're cognitive misers. We want these quick automatic reflections, and we don't want to have to think about it. If we already have the belief, I don't need to think about it anymore. It's like, he's a bad guy, he's going to do bad things. Or he's a good guy, and he's going to do good things. Again, not saying it's a Nazi salute. However, if the ADL says it's not one, that's at least a piece of evidence to at least consider. But most people won't, because they already have the belief, and they don't want to change it. Or at least they don't want to consider the other side. It is similar to confirmation bias. You want to ignore contradictory information. That's for the ADL on the other side. So the ADL thinks it's not. But on the other side, let's say you didn't think it was a Nazi salute. A few days later, Musk urged Germans to move past their guilt over Nazi crimes. And then he also made a series of Nazi-themed puns on X. And so it's like, okay, now wait a second. Let's say you didn't think it was a Nazi salute. Those two pieces of the puzzle now, it's like, I don't know. Because it's like, why is he saying these things? Unless maybe there is, where there's smoke, there's fire. So now it's like, maybe it was a Nazi salute. Maybe. We talked a little bit about mixed evidence and first impressions. You would think that if things are ambiguous and you have mixed information, mixed evidence, that it would reduce polarization. You'd think, I'm not sure what to think. I'm not exactly sure what's going on here. If we look back at that data, though, it's kind of weird. It is ambiguous, but it's only 9% said they weren't sure what the gesture meant. So that means 91% of people are pretty sure what that gesture meant, and it's like split down the middle almost. You would think with mixed evidence and being ambiguous that 9% would maybe be a little bit higher than that. But no, mixed evidence can actually add to that polarization because you're going to rely on some of these schemas that you already have. What would the Democratic Party have me say? What would the Republican Party have me say? You're going to lean onto those automatic processes to tell you, to inform you how to perceive that image. Some other issues, the social context effect. So it was Inauguration Day, and people are going to see things through that political lens because of that. It was at a political rally, same for that. It's an inherently tribal event. It's a polarizing event. And then Musk's previous activities, again, the ADL has accused him in the past of being anti-Semitic. Musk has also made statements that have been construed as anti-Semitic by other people. He brought, for example, he let genocide deniers back on X after he bought X. So it's like statements like that paired with the gesture together, it increases that chance, that likelihood of perceiving it as a Nazi salute. On the other hand, again, chapter 4, it's all about all this ambiguous information that we use to inform our decisions. One of the things that people said at that time was that Musk has this known social awkwardness. He stated he has Asperger's, which is now under the umbrella of the autism spectrum disorder. He is socially awkward. He was socially awkward on SNL. He had strange behavior there. His dance moves at Tesla events are a little peculiar. And he did say before he made the gesture, he said, "My heart goes out to you," while he's making that gesture. He clasped his hand to his chest right before he did it, providing what you could maybe consider like a literal, innocent explanation for the movement from the heart to the audience. And again, to mention the ADL did have a good quote there. The ADL itself called for giving one bit of grace, perhaps even the benefit of the doubt. So even the social context has this mixed evidence. There is a video, if you want to check that out, if you'd like to actually go watch the salute. This video I think is about 2 minutes long. At the end of the day, we are trying to look at this through the lens of social psychology. We're not trying to make judgments. It is ambiguous. We cannot definitively say what his intentions were. We do not have access to his private thoughts. It is a really good example, though, of the things that we talked about in chapter 4 of social processing. And it's just kind of good in general. It's good to think about nuance. It's good to think about your biases. It's good to investigate why you think the things that you think. Okay, hopefully that was helpful. Thank you for listening.